Ex-prisoners. What are the most interesting, funny, scary, or gross stories from your time behind bars? Story 1. I was a college instructor teaching in state prisons for several years. At first, I was a bit anxious about being in that environment. After all, I was in a room with about 24 convicted murderers and drug dealers. It wasn't exactly a welcoming place, but after about a month, I realized that I had nothing to worry about. I was surprised to find that these guys were willing to put themselves in harm's way to protect the teachers. I had just started my lecture one day when a lockdown was called. Our room was locked from the outside, and we could not move until it was over. We heard, coming from upstairs, what sounded like a riot breaking out. "Teach, get in the corner," one of my guys said, practically pulling me off my feet and pushing me into the corner furthest from the classroom door. The guys then proceeded, without saying a word to each other, to pile all the classroom desks in front of the door and stand between me and said desks. They were creating a barrier to keep me safe. It turns out that the riot we heard was not as big as we feared, so the lockdown only lasted about an hour. Afterward, once we got the okay and the room was put back in order, I asked the guys why they did what they did. "Some motherfricker hurts you," one of the guys said. "All the teachers will leave. We don't want to lose our education because some a-holes can't control themselves." Story 2. I worked with a guy that used to be a prison guard. He would tell some wild stories. All of them involved the smell. He said prison smells like butter and butt. One story that stood out was how the prisoners would keep pet roaches and tie string to them to transfer items between cells. One prisoner was trying to get a cigarette to the cell to his left, but the roach kept going right. So he grabbed the string and swung it in circles to the left. After that, the roach went left. Looks like we uncovered the secret to successful prison communication: roach mail. I wonder if they have a roach post office with little cages and everything. Can't wait for the day when I can send my own letters via the trusty prison roach courier service. Story 3. I got bunk restriction while I was in jail on one of my first nights. Twice a day they did roll call where we all had to sit on our bunks and be quiet while the officer came bunk to bunk and checked all of our wristbands and made sure we were all who we said we were. Halfway through he was doing this, someone rips the loudest, fattest, longest wet fart I've ever heard in my life. Me, having the mind of a 5-year-old, burst into laughter. I've never heard a fart like this in my life. A few other guys laugh, but even thinking of it now, I giggle about it. Anyways, the officer is like, "All right, settle down." But I can't stop laughing about it. He tells me to calm down, but I tell him through my tears of laughter, I literally cannot help it. I really couldn't. It was the funniest thing that had happened the few days I was in there. Anyways, he gets furious. He punishes me by sending me to solitary confinement. The rest of the night I spent alone in a cold and dark cell with nothing but my thoughts and the memory of that fart to keep me company. Story 5. Father-in-law did 12 years on a second-degree murder rap back in the very early 90s. He told me that one time this new guy plopped himself down at the Hells Angels table and started eating breakfast. When he was told to move, he ignored them. After breakfast, the COs ended up having to cut through about 6 rolls of duct tape to get the guy loose. He never sat near the HAs again. Looks like this guy learned the hard way that it's never a good idea to mess with the Hells Angels at mealtime. Talk about being stuck in a sticky situation. I guess I'll have to find a new breakfast spot from now on. Story 6. I've worked in a prison for some time in medical. What surprised me more than anything else is how many inmates have below normal IQ. Like, no matter how bad and common you may think it is, it's really bad and even more common. A lot of them don't even belong in prison. They definitely shouldn't be out on the street, but they and society would benefit a lot more from keeping them in an environment where they can get real treatment. Prison makes them so much worse. I'll tell you a story. One time, one such inmate was having a fit and asking to speak to someone from behavioral health. Well, it was night shift and we didn't have any BH professionals on duty at the time. So I agreed to go talk to him. He was a black male in his 30s, past violent offender. It turns out that he was angry because he had gotten moved from one cell to another, and his radio had gotten damaged, and some of his stuff was missing. He was frustrated and didn't feel like he was getting an explanation. The inmate thought it was because everyone hated his music. "They always be complaining about my music, and that's why they broke my radio," he said. And to emphasize the point, he turned the radio on full blast with one of Duran Duran's songs playing. When he turned it off, after a few seconds, I remarked, "Well, I think that's outrageous. Who would have a problem with Duran Duran?" That got him. "You like Duran Duran?" Oh yeah, my sister was their biggest fan in the 80s. Played them all the time, which means I was listening too. The inmate's mood changed, and he showed me his property form that had everything and asked me to verify that the radio was recorded as undamaged on the form. As I looked at it, I noticed that he had a box of crayons listed among his property. I asked him what sorts of things he draws and colors. The inmate pulled out a folder containing some blank coloring pages that he had of various things. I saw one picture of an owl and mentioned that I like owls. He told me he'd color it for me. I'll tell you what then, if you promise to color that owl for me, I will come back tomorrow and visit you to see how you're doing. Deal? He agreed to it. The next day, I showed up, and the guy was absolutely jubilant. The owl was perfectly colored, and he insisted that I take it. He couldn't stop talking about it either, and he remarked somewhere in the middle, "All my life my folks told me not to trust white people, but you did what you said you would." It was such a small damn thing, and it mattered to this man to the point that it made him question the negativity that may have led him to the hard place he found himself in. I'll never forget how happy he was right then. For my part, I still have that owl picture hanging on my refrigerator. This story is a beautiful reminder of the power of connection and the importance of treating each individual with empathy and understanding. It's easy to make assumptions and stereotypes, but this story shows that even the most hardened offender can be moved by something as simple as a shared love for Duran Duran or a colored owl. It's a reminder that we should never underestimate the impact of small gestures, and that everyone has a story worth listening to. Story 7. My husband is currently serving time right now. I've never been to prison, but I'll share the most terrifying thing that has happened to me while he's been in there. A few months back, he had called me from prison, normal thing he usually calls at least once a day, and we were just having a normal conversation. When he started to sound quite distracted, I was getting frustrated that he wasn't listening to me because he kept asking me to repeat myself. Then, out of the blue, I hear two loud voices yelling. Then, a lot of people yelling. Then a huge bang and more yelling and screaming. The entire time I'm still on the phone, desperately yelling my husband's name, not knowing what the fuck was happening. Turns out a fight had broken out, and the guards that were watching up in the gallery had shot beanbags, my husband calls them. So everyone who was in the rec room hit the floor to try not to get hit. He didn't get the phone hung up in time. The most scared I've been in my adult life, not knowing what was happening, aware it was something bad, and not knowing if my husband was involved. Very tense 3 hours of waiting until he was able to call me back to let me know he was okay and what happened. Story 8. Told a kid there was a pool out at yard. Guard saw him waiting to go out in shorts with his shower towel and asked him what he was doing. Kid said, "I'm gonna go swimming outside. It looks nice." Don't think I've ever laughed so hard in my entire life. Story 9. Not me, but a close friend was locked up in jail, but they kept moving him around. So for 3 days, he didn't get a chance to shower. When they did finally put him in a prison, it was too late to shower. First thing in the morning, he was standing at the door of his shared cell waiting with a towel to go shower. He was the first one in, stripped off, and started scrubbing himself. He could sense the other inmates getting in the showers around him, but realized no one was using the shower heads next to him. Plus, there was a queue at the door. That's when he noticed he was the only one naked. Everyone else kept their boxer shorts on. He kind of just muttered, "Sorry, chaps," and got out immediately. Story 10. Not me, but my husband was in prison as a young adult. He said that they had a way of checking your ego in the spot he was at. The toughest guys would come up to you on your first day and ask how many push-ups you could do. If you were smart, you would just sort of blow it off or laugh it off and move on. If you were a stupid show-off or had something to prove, you would claim a large number or talk yourself up. If you did that, then they would be all friendly and be like, "Oh, let's see it." So the poor guy would do as many push-ups as they could. The tough guys would gas the new guy up, acting friendly, pushing him to do more. They acted impressed and joked around. Then as soon as the new guy had done as many push-ups as possible, they would jump him and beat him up. He would be helpless to resist because he had just maxed himself out on push-ups. Afterwards, any guy with an ego was normally really quiet for the remainder of their stay. Story 11. This may have not been his first day, but I will never forget this. This while I was in the intake tank, which is the first tank or section you go into after being processed in county. This young kid comes into county and keeps complaining that he doesn't get his cannabinol and other funny leaf-related prescriptions in jail. He was really arrogant and constant pissing everyone off. During count one day, as we were all in our bunks, he starts complaining again and then says to the guard, "What if we all riot?" Immediately, like 10 other guys yell very loudly, "We don't know or agree with him." The guard then says, "What the frick did you say?" The kid then continues about rioting and that he has rights. Everyone in the tank frickin' stays frozen in their bunk, trying their best to be non-threatening and also show they have no interest in what this moron is saying. So the guard picks him up by his throat and slams him into the wall. After scaring the kid shitless, he explains he has a new charge for inciting a riot. Kid gets hauled off to solitary. Never saw him again, but I heard he spent the rest of his 30, 60, 90, whatever amount days in solitary. Absolutely insane to me that he'd say that in a fucking county jail. Looks like this kid didn't realize he was in the wrong place to ask for his funny leaf prescriptions. He should have tried a botanical garden instead of a county jail. I bet he learned his lesson and won't be inciting any riots in the future. Story 12. Kid gets booked in, hits the unit, and starts borrowing food and other commissionary items. Before he knew it, he was $200 in the hole. Problem is, in jail and prison, most people who are willing to loan items out expect 2 or 3 of the same item back. You know, interest. Very easy way to get yourself indebted is by borrowing any food or other items. Never get in debt while incarcerated. Story 13. I did 5 years myself in prison in 2 states, New York and New Jersey. Prison was the only place I've ever heard the term "pardon me" in person. I laughed my butt off with good people, got jacked from working out religiously, learned a few things in both street smarts and education overall. I've read literally hundreds of books. I would say there is nothing I miss, but I saw it as a learning experience, and it wasn't the worst thing. Time is what you make of it. The different states had vastly different prison experiences. New York was surreal. They offer the inmates a shit ton of activities like classes, jobs, and trainings, as opposed to New Jersey. Both were violent from time to time, New Jersey more so, but only because I went to a gladiator school, i.e. youth corrections, meaning the younger adults were all sent to generally one of 3 prisons, and would be shipped to the other youth ones if they caused too much drama. New York prisoners like to cut each other, while I would say Jersey favors hand-to-fist fighting. This may have been addressed, but the respect and manners is more towards living in a confined space, so you need to be wary of others or else there can be consequences. On the street, you'll hold a door and someone will walk through it like you're their fucking assistant. In prison, however, they would always say, "Thank you." Story 14. In one of the prisons in Brazil, once the lights went out, you'd start hearing scraping noises on the concrete. It was gang members sharpening their homemade knives on the concrete floor. Somebody was about to get killed when you heard that noise. Stuff straight out of hell. Story 15. I went to jail for about 3 weeks because of driving with a suspended license. We all slept in these huge rooms with bathroom and living area connected. About a week in, I hear some guy get up and use the small microwave that we're given in the living area to make stuff hot, like ramen. It's not normal for the microwave to be used after lights out, but I figured maybe he had a roll or something he wanted to heat up and munch on before sleeping. The guard posted on the far wall never said anything to him or even got up from his seat, though I could tell from my bunk he was watching the inmate. So the guy comes back to the bed area and walks right past me with this bowl in his hands. I close my eyes and try to go to sleep, but the silence is shattered by this blood-curdling scream from a couple rows down. The guy had filled a bowl with baby oil and heated it until boiling and then poured it on some guy's face in his sleep. Found out later they had some kind of fight a few days earlier and the baby oil guy was out for revenge. Burn guy had 3rd-degree burns on his face, neck, shoulders, and chest. Baby oil guy was taken away and we never heard from him again. Also, we lost our microwave, so to heat things up, we had to use hot water from the sink and just let stuff sit in it forever to heat it up. Sucked arse to be sure, but not as bad as being covered in boiling frickin' oil. Please leave your story down below in the comments. I would absolutely love to make a video about them in the future. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, peace.